Rommel in the desert. Alright. So I gotta say this, I feel kind of cheap for only doing the Italian scenario because I gotta reorganize this. I think that there is more for me to explore in the game by far by looking at how historical the real scenario is. The Italian one is not very historically accurate at all. Like I said, it's very easy from my couple of playings of it. Yeah, I played once long ago. I don't know, I think I did the Italian. And once more recently with my wife. But it would be interesting to explore that aspect of it. But I don't actually think that's an important factor in the game to the people who like it. I don't think how accurate it portrays the campaign is of terrible importance. And in one sense, that makes this almost not a war game. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I feel like it's more about the competition, the hidden pieces, the maneuvering on the hex grid in such a way as to try to gain this kind of, maneuver advantage, essentially, to cut the supply. The hidden supply cards add a lot to it in that game sense of it. My assessment at this point is it's sort of a combination of if you took Africa Core and added a fog of war type situation. Yes, the combat design is different. And there's something kind of subtle and interesting about the combat design just because of the different, this isn't just a straight Axis and Allies type buckets of dice. But it is actually a little bit more mechanically complicated than an Axis and Allies type system is, because you have to match up particular units in attack. There is a lot of mechanical complexity to the game, more than, say, in an Axis and Allies, simply because you have to reach over and pull all your blocks and set them up to see what you've got in terms of each attack. So each turn has a number of these kind of discrete events that aren't just chucking some dice and seeing what happens. So there is more to the combat system, and some promises, perhaps, of a greater historical accuracy than I would expect in it. I can't make a real judgment on that, nor obviously on the balance of the big game, having never played that. I can, though, talk a little bit about what it is, even after playing it solo, I have to say I like it better than I've played it opposed, than any time that I've played it opposed. Opposed, it always struck me as just, so simplistic and everything. But solo, I get to kind of enjoy the experience of making the decisions more than I would in an opposed game. I get to see, perhaps, where the sort of gut-wrenching decisions of whether or not, to spend your supply to make an attack or whatever may actually come. Although I think in the extended campaign, there's a lot less of that. You have this kind of gathering of supply. There are some things that bother me, though. One is supply is unlimited as long as you keep your lines safe. And that's why I say it's kind of like, your Africa Core type game. It's all about controlling and understanding the roadways and the map supply lines, rather than worrying about the actual limited supplies that you need to keep your troops in the field, as well as to be able to attack or defend. Now, attacking it actually handles, because you can't cause a fight without one of the actual supply cards, but you can defend perfectly well without any expenditure. And I feel like maybe there needs to be some sort of restriction to how well you can defend built into the game in order to capture an element that I think is just missing, and that favors the defender perhaps too much it may all balance out, but if it is balancing it out, it's because there's some other fudge factor somewhere else that's, maybe making the tax on the attacker too low as well. There is, but this is the case in Africa Court too. There's a lot of subtlety in terms of how you want to maneuver around on the board. And by adding a little bit of fog of war, that may make it a lot more interesting to some people. But and it kind of covers up that puzzle aspect. You can't just look at the board and say, okay, I know if I go here, he's cut off, and I've got a good enough odds of attack that I can, pretty much guarantee that I survive projecting my zones of control and everything. In this, first of all, you don't have the zones of control, but there is still that very geometric feel in terms of trying to break the supply lines. They have to be maintained throughout. So I think there's a lot of interest in this, a lot of interesting factors in this as a game, and I'm able to understand that better playing it solo than I was in the opposed game. In the opposed game, it was just a damn headache for me, to tell you the truth. I don't like hard decisions. I don't like sitting there and agonizing over, well, what if he has this? Or being in that position where I can have to try to calculate and guess what my opponent actually has in his space. When I play solo, I tend to look at it more as, well, I don't really care. I'm not going to count the factors. I know it's hidden movement, but I don't care as much. I'm not put into that kind of position where I feel like, oh, my decision matters enough that I don't want to make it anymore. So it takes away that kind of competitive misery that I feel. But for people who really like a strongly competitive game, I'm sure the fog of war and that thing here, those kind of aspects are precisely what makes this, dare I say, classic that it kind of is. I definitely had an impression before I picked this copy up and played it recently that the block games had almost nothing to really recommend themselves to me. Now, I had played this one and had not terribly liked it, and I had played Quebec, and I think I disliked that even more. I can't remember much about Quebec. My biggest complaint, though, is the blocks themselves. They do nothing good for me. They're clumsy. I'm clumsy with them. They make the mechanical aspect of actually resolving the combats more complex. They're easily moved in a position to which they no longer represent what they should, and you could easily make screw-ups with that. I'm also a little disturbed with the replacement points. Both sides getting the same amount each turn. That seems a little funny. I can see that as a balanced situation, but that sure the hell is not historically accurate at all. And there's a heavy effect in terms of forces in the back not being able to move forward. So it was fairly easy for the Commonwealth to push forces forward to the line if they needed to, even without using the ports. And likewise, it wasn't terribly difficult for the Africa Corps to throw its forces up in the Alexandria region. What was hard was when you actually came to the combat situation. So there were two things that really limited, which was the number of troops available for the campaign, which by making that kind of equal, or by making the points available for shipping stuff back and getting those troops kind of equal, you're not going to get anything that there's going to be a historical inaccuracy there. Even if the overall effect ends up evening out, again, it's a matter of two wrongs making a right, essentially. You get to the right place, perhaps, but when you try to examine the mechanisms that got you there, they don't seem believable. And then the other is, you're basically expending troops, replacement points, to build minefields and to move units back and forth as if supply and troops were just an equitable resource that you could exchange for each other. They're not, and they weren't historically. And when I start looking at things like that, I say, well, it doesn't matter what kind of results I get. If I get that flow back and forth and it looks perfect, I know that, the gritty details, as far as this game takes them, are so wrong that there's nothing for me to learn here. All I get to do is play that chess-like game, with randomness, of course, but that kind of... So, I kind of look at it as this mix of Stratego and Africa Core, not because of anything other than the Fog of War for Stratego, but the Fog of War is pretty damn big in this. You can hide a crappy unit and hold an area with it because the enemy's just not willing to take a risk at attacking it. Anyway, I at least have a little bit better understanding of what people see in this as a game than I did before. Before, when playing it opposed, it just didn't click for me at all. There is a lot of subtlety in terms of the maneuvering. We saw a little bit of that towards the end of my play. And I'm sure over in Libya, where there are more roads, it gets a lot more interesting. But over on the Egypt side, it is really kind of devoted to that coastal run. It's not going to make my rating go up. To do so would be to say, well, this is at least as good as chess, even though I don't like it. The thing definitely, and it probably would have that, I can assure you it would have that 6-point rating if it used counters instead of the blocks. It might even go higher than that because it is an interesting game, but the damn blocks piss me off so much. And it's not like that's a cheaper production choice, but it's one that appeals to a lot of people. At least if they want to stack them and make little shapes out of them, and little forts and castles and stuff. All right, up it goes.